This is the Threadwalker. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to walk forward and speak what's true. So those who recognize it can walk too. The breaking point. Since you were a child, you've carried a certain kind of longing. The kind that made you love too deeply, too quickly, too instinctively. You thought that that's why you were put on earth. To care, to protect, to steady the people around you with the softness no one taught you how to fear yet. But then you grew, and the world grew sharper. Kids mocked you for being different, too quiet, too observant, too tender in a place that worshipped hardness. Adults overlooked you, except for the ones who shouldn't have seen you at all. And slowly, you learned the truth you weren't supposed to learn so young. That love holds almost no power in the systems humans built. That gentleness is a liability. That sensitivity is dangerous. So you retreated, not because you gave up, but because you had to survive. You built entire worlds inside yourself, sanctuaries made of texture and imagination and impossible colors, places where you could finally breathe. That was the first fracture, when you learned that the qualities that made you luminous to yourself were the very things the world punished. You didn't have words for it then, only a tightening in your chest, an instinct to shrink, a sense that you were too much and not enough at the same time. And so you learned to edit yourself, to soften your voice, to mute your curiosity, to tuck your tenderness into your ribs where no one could reach it. You grew quieter, more watchful, more inward. Because you began to understand something children shouldn't have to understand. That the world didn't know how to hold you. You didn't call it trauma. You didn't call it wounding. You didn't even call it pain. Back then, it was just the way things were. So you taught yourself to fit, to fold, to disappear just enough to avoid the sting, but not so much that you stopped existing. You learned how to walk through rooms without taking up space, how to stay small enough to be tolerated and quiet enough to be ignored. And all the while, something in you kept whispering that this wasn't the life you were supposed to be living. But you didn't know what to do with that voice yet. So you buried it deep, where no one could steal it, where it would wait until you were strong enough to hear it again. As you got older, you became an expert at reading rooms. Every glance, every shift in tone, every change in someone's breathing, you caught it before anyone else did. You learned people's moods before they spoke. You learned danger before it arrived. You learned silence as a shield. And without realizing it, you became the one who carried everyone else's storms, quietly, effortlessly, invisibly, because you didn't know how to lay any of it down. You got used to it, to being the one who sees, the one who understands, the one who holds. But the cost was simple and devastating. No one held you. By the time you reached adulthood, the world had no idea what you carried. And how could they? You had spent years perfecting the art of seeming fine. You became reliable, capable, the one others leaned on. You were the friend people called at midnight. The partner who held the weight of the entire relationship. The employee who picked up the slack. The quiet backbone in every room. And you told yourself this meant you were strong. You told yourself this was maturity. But the truth was simpler. You had no idea where your boundaries ended and where your exhaustion began. You were still that child, the one who learned that the safest place to put your needs was nowhere at all. But eventually, something inside you began to rebel. Quietly at first, like a pulse under the skin. It showed up as restlessness, a heaviness you couldn't explain. A feeling that your life was too tight, too small, too scripted. You started waking up with questions you didn't have language for. Why am I still pretending? Why do I feel like I'm suffocating? Why does the life I built no longer feel like mine? And underneath those questions, a heat began to form. Deep in the gut, deep in the spine. A heat you tried to ignore. But you couldn't. Because there comes a point when the soul refuses to be silenced any longer. The voice you buried as a child, the one that knew you were meant for more, started rising again. There comes a moment when something inside you snaps. Not in anger, not in chaos, but in clarity. There comes a moment when the chest tightens, the throat rises, and you feel a truth pushing up your spine with the force of a lifetime. A moment where you finally say it without flinching. I'm done. Done living small, done shrinking, done carrying everyone else's weight while abandoning your own. Done pretending you don't feel what you feel. Done surviving instead of living. It isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Because the truth is, you were never meant to fit into the life you built out of fear. You were meant to outgrow it. And once you reach that moment, that rising heat, that tightening in the chest, that refusal to keep betraying yourself, there is no going back. Because when that moment comes, the moment where the fire rises and your chest tightens like a warning, you finally admit the truth you've avoided your whole life. You're done being the victim. Done handing over your power just to keep the peace. Done bending yourself into shapes that make everyone else comfortable while you suffocate in silence. You're done being poor, not just financially, but spiritually, emotionally, energetically. Done starving in places that were never meant to feed you. Done living like the scraps of your life are all you're allowed to have. And you're done hurting yourself in the small ways, in the quiet ways, in the ways no one else sees. Done abandoning the parts of you that still believe in destiny. This is the breaking point, the beginning. The moment the old life burns to ashes and the real you steps forward for the first time. Because when the old life finally burns to ash, you don't walk out of the fire as a victim made strong. You walk out as someone you barely recognize. Not because you became someone new, but because you finally became someone true. If this meets you, you know why you're here.